Professor Rezavi, there are people within the Indian government who want to replace names of places and locations that have tremendous significance to Muslims in India. And they want to change the names of those places and name them after Hindu leaders. The reason they say is that those places, like for example, mosques and palaces, were built after the destruction of Hindu temples. So it's now time to correct the mistakes of the past. If you talk to historians in India, many well respected historians will tell you that Aurangzeb, the Muslim emperor of India who ruled over India from 1650 to the early 1700s, he was a religious fanatic. He factually destroyed a lot of Hindu temples, and he instituted policies that particularly discriminated against Hindus. So, my first question to you is, Professor, how can you defend someone like Aurangzeb, who is clearly to blame for creating the reasons that created the polarization that we see in Indian society today?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me in your interview. Uh, I'll start not with your direct question, but I would start with the comments which you made before asking the question about Aurangzeb. Uh, you know, the thing is that basically there are two things which have been happening in India since the last 5, 6 years, if not more. And that is that there have been a number of name changes of various cities and places by claiming that these are the names which have been given to such places by foreigners, and they are not the original names as given by the local inhabitants, but names given by people who had come from outside. The second thing which has been happening is that a number of religious structures belonging to a particular community have been harmed, have been dismantled, have been destroyed in the name that, uh, according to them, because originally a temple existed there which had been destructed by the invaders, and now they are going to do justice and replace it with the original monument. These are the two things which are happening in my country. Thirdly, to justify all these claims, an attempt is being made to present our past in very communal colors. Uh, the manner in which the past of India is being shown is as it was only strife and nothing else which was happening. They want to tell the masses that everything was peaceful, hunky dory, until and unless the marauders who belonged to one particular religion invaded the country, and because they have this concept of martyrdom, because they have this concept of religious warfare, jihad, they, in order to establish, their particular religion, uh, they started indulging in certain activities which resulted in the loss of Hinduism, and precedence was given to Islam. That is what an attempt has been. Perhaps the earlier two things which I talked about and this premise which is being presented are based on falsehoods, or at best a misunderstanding of history. Uh, Aurangzeb, as you rightly pointed out, is being depicted in very communal colors. Now, there are two things which are being forgotten here. One, that when you are talking about the past, you are talking about a different period altogether. What happened during the 10th century or 16th century or 17th century, they are all pre-modern times when every concept was different. As a student of history, I would argue that please look at the past not with the present eyes, but with the eyes which can discern what was actually happening during that very century itself. Every century has its own predilections, its own problems, its own understandings, its own vocabulary, its own philosophy. So do not superimpose the ideas of 20th and 21st century to something which happened in the past. Before I go on to answer all your questions which you have asked, I would also point out that let us not forget that in 1947, when India and Pakistan were born as nations, before that, there was neither an Indian nation nor a Pakistani nation. The very concept of nation is very, very new. It is something which started developing in Europe during the 19th century itself, to be exact. I mean, its germs had started from way back in 18th century, and or you might even say that late 17th century. But factually speaking, this concept of a nation in India, it comes only very late in 19th century or the first half of the 20th century. Before that, we were not a nation. If there was not a nation, there was hardly any question of somebody being Indian or someone being a non-Indian, a foreigner. You know, when Aryans came to India, they defeated the local inhabitants, right? Subjugated them. It was not the foreigners who were coming here. I mean, anyone who came. For example, then from 10th century or 8th century onwards, it was the Muslims who started coming to India. Look at the sources, Indian sources, which are written in the Indian languages, sources which are there even in Sanskrit. None of these invasions, none of these people who are coming to India are identified as Muslims. They are identified by two terms. One, Malecha, those who do not follow the Brahmanical order. Number two, they are also referred to as Turushka, the Turks, their ethnicity. Show me one instance where the Indians complain about the Muslim invasions. There is no discussion of that.
But they were Muslims, the
They were,
invaders.
they were Huns were not Muslims. Aryans were not Muslims. All those who were crossing the Himalayas, the Hindu Kush, who were coming from the northwest frontier, there were people of many races, many religions who were coming. Why do you just, point out only to one religious community? All of them were coming, and all those in the earlier stages, say 8th to 10th century, all of them are being referred to as Turushkas who are attacking. Whether they are Mongols, Mongols are not Turks. But all those invasions, they are being referred to in the indigenous sources as Turushkas who are coming to India. There is no Hinduism. Even the term Hindu is of modern origin. The term Hindu was only being used for the people inhabiting a particular region. All those who were living beyond the river Sindh, they were identified as Hindu. The thing is that the Arabs, when they came, they could not, or in fact, the Iranians, they could not pronounce sa. That is one of the basic differences between the Zoroastrian texts of Iran, Zendavesta, and Rig Veda. Whatever is mentioned with sa or sha in Indian texts, it's ha in Iran. So, River Sindh was the break point, and all the Persian sources, and then following that, the Arab sources, they use the term ha for it. Hind. Istan is once again an old Persian term. Khuzestan, Kazakhstan. The stan is for a place. Hindustan, the land beyond Sindh. Just like in Iran, they have Khuzestan, for example. So, the first use of the term Hindustan was based on the term Hind. The languages which were spoken here were also known as Hindui or Hindu languages. The people who were living here, they were called as Hindu or Hindi, right? So this term came to be applied for the language. This term came to be applied for the people inhabiting this region.
So what you're saying is that
When the Europeans came, the Greeks, they could not pronounce ha. So from Hind, they made it Ind. So you have Indostan, and from that, the term India. So what I am trying to say
what
is,
was the religion of the people that were living in this region at that time?
that is why in Indian history you would see the term Muslims and non-Muslims. There was no single religion out here. I mean, there were Vaishnavites, there were Shaivites, there were believers of this God, there were believers of that God, there were people who believed in image worship, there were people who were Nirgun, who could not believe in any image worship, there were people who were the believers of Shakti, there were believers who had a personal God, there were believers who had some other type of God. In fact, there were people who were Gnostic.
Professor, wouldn't you agree that all of this is part of Hindu religion?
Well, all those who were not following the path of Muhammad, they were, that is why, labeled as non-Muslims, because there is no other term for them. There were a number of religions or ideologies which together, because they were not Muslims, they were not Christians, they were not Semitic, they were labeled as, non-Muslim religions.
So Hinduism did not exist at that time as an organized religion.
There was no Hinduism. If you talk about Hinduism, no single text of Hindu religion as we know it today refers to this term at all. This term is used only in the Persian sources, which were all written by the Muslims. This term itself. So what I am trying to say is that, this communalism, this binary of Muslim versus the Hindus is in a very modern context. It's perhaps during the colonial period when all this starts. Well, there were certain, communities. There was a Muslim community, there was no doubt about it. There was also a community who were not Muslims. So at best we can, if you have to refer to them, sometimes we refer to them as Brahmanical faiths. That is one of the terms which have been used for them.
When did Hinduism as an organized religion came into existence, as an organ, the way we know it today?
that came into existence only during the 20th century.
Um,
It's only during the 20th century when there were certain movements which, under the influence of Semitic religions where there's one God, there were certain movements which led, for example, this person who went even to London, that Swami Vivekanand,
yeah.
perhaps he was one of the first who, in fact, through his movement, was responsible for making one cohesive whole of all the Brahmanical faiths which existed before the time. Uh, for example, during the reign of Akbar, we have evidence that the so-called Hindus of today, Vaishnavites and Shaivites, there were so bloody clashes between them that riots would occur between them. There's also a painting showing how the Vaishnavas and Shaivites, they are fighting against each other and killings are taking place. There was no homogeneity within this group, as in fact there was hardly any homogeneity in what is now known as Islam, which was being practiced in India. We were also divided. The Muslim community was also divided into, Hanafi, Shafis, Malikis, and so on and so forth. The Shiites. If you look at Akbar's Ibadat Khana discussions, religious discourses which would be held in the evening, he doesn't talk about the Muslim theologians. He talks about the Hanafi ulama, the Shafi'i ulama, and when he allows that others should also join in, then there is the Shia ulama who are coming. There are, the so-called Brahmanical faiths pandits who are coming. There are Jains who are coming. There are others who are coming. There's no mention of Hindu, no mention of Muslim theology as such. This is something which has been given in the modern textbooks. So, remember, when we are talking about the past, we are talking about a particular situation which is very different from the modern one. Uh, Let me also draw your attention to another fact. You talked about the temple destruction. There is an article written by an American historian, Professor Richard Eaton. Um, Richard Eaton first wrote an article, The Destruction of Hindu Temples in Early Medieval India, which was published in some scholarly journal, but later on, a lighter version of that, divided into two parts, was published in a very popular uh, Indian journal, which is known as Frontline. Perhaps it was in 1980s that destruction of temples in India, this was the title of the paper, was published in two parts in the Frontline magazine of the Hindu group. The Hindu, you must have heard the name of the very popular newspaper. There's a whole group. It also brings out this magazine fortnightly, the Frontline. So in that, these two parts appeared. Later on, Richard Eaton then further developed this article and published a book with the same title. And this book you can download from the internet. It has been published and printed from United States of America. Now, in this book, and before that in the article, Richard Eaton, on the basis of charts and tables with proper evidence in his hand, he tried to demonstrate that the destruction of the temples was not an unusual thing as far as medieval period is concerned. Remember that medieval period in India, it starts from 8th century AD and comes up till around the mid 18th century. He showed that during this medieval period, even at a time when Muslims were not ruling, remember that between 8th century down to 1206, the 90% of the rulers in India, they were non-Muslims. There were certain dynasties, Pal, Pratihar, Rashtrakuta, Chola, Chalukya, a large number of them ruling uh, over the subcontinent, small places. Now, during the period of these dynasties, from 8th to 10th, and then from 10th to early 13th century, this was the practice that if one king or one dynasty defeated the king of another dynasty, the temple which was devoted to the family of the defeated dynasty would be broken. The temple of the Kul Devta, family deity, who had been defeated. Because the concept was that the power of this dynasty or this king was being derived from the personal god in which they believed in. Right? So if there was a Vaishnavite kingship and he was being defeated by another Vaishnav king, so the main official temple of this dynasty, which was also Vaishnavite, but it would be broken down, the idols would be taken out and replaced by the idol of the personal god Kul Devta of the winning dynasty.
So
Right?
essentially, you're saying that Hindus destroying temples,
Hindus themselves
right?
destroyed the temples devoted to the Kul Devtas of the defeated dynasty. Similarly, there was another instance in which the temples would be destroyed, even by the non-Muslim kings. And that was when any rebellion or revolt would take place. And you know, if you read this article, it's a very interesting article. No need to go to the book itself. Even in this article, there are around a dozen or so charts which show in which year which dynasty broke the temple of what dynasty and which god was replaced by which god. So you have Shaivite being converted into Vaishnavite, Vaishnavite into Shaivite, Buddhist by Jains, Jains by Buddhists, so on and so forth. Right? And Richard Eaton tries to show that this was something which was a well-established practice even before the entry of the Turks into the Indian subcontinent. And when the Turks came, they also followed the same policy. You know, take the example of Aurangzeb. Let us forget all the things in between. Let us, because you mentioned Aurangzeb, so let us come to Aurangzeb. During the reign of Aurangzeb, there were a large number of temples, and they continue till date. We have, you know, in a number of archives, large number of grants confirmed by Aurangzeb to these very same temples. Grants which were given for their maintenance. The grants were given to the temples by Akbar. Grants were given to the temples by Jahangir. Grants were given to the temple by Shah Jahan. In fact, in one of the farmans of Shah Jahan, it is mentioned that the prayers, the lighting of the lamp in a temple is equal to namaz which is being, you know, prayed in the mosque. Because at the end of the day, a prayer is to God. And in order that this prayer to God should continue in the temple, Shah Jahan, the emperor, is giving so many thousands of rupees annually to this particular temple, which will be maintained by the Brahmin such and such and such. Right? So there were grants which were, for example, I'll name one place which is very important, Vrindavan. You must have heard about Vrindavan, the place associated with Lord Krishna. In fact, this place, Vrindavan, started developing during the period of Akbar. The, you know, Ram in Ayodhya and Krishna in Mathura, they developed into major gods during the period of Akbar himself, due to the grants which were given
So why
by
the
Akbar.
contradiction? Why the contradiction on one hand?
I'm coming to that. These grants which were given to the Vaishnav temples, if you believe in Ram, you believe in Krishna, you are a Vaishnavite. So grants were given to these Vaishnavite temples. They were confirmed under Jahangir, these grants. More grants were given by Jahangir himself, fresh grants. Shah Jahan gave, added to the grants, more grants to newer temples which were there. So by the time that we come to the reign of Aurangzeb, the total number of temples who were being maintained by the state funds was massive, because all those grants which had been given during the period of Akbar, Jahangir, Shah Jahan, and then by Aurangzeb itself, they were all being being maintained by the Mughal state under Aurangzeb. Now the question is, if so many grants were being given, why the destructions took place? I will take you back to what Eaton had said. Only at places where there was a rebellion or revolt or any reason where the emperor or the ruling administration would believe that there is lawlessness, action would be taken. At a time when Satnami revolts took place, Jat revolts took place, it was the time when the Mathura temple was built. Temple at Mathura, which is now under contention. During the first 10 years of Aurangzeb, nothing happened. But suddenly, at a time when in 1660s, from late 1650s and in 1660s, when revolts started, peasant revolts, trading communities revolts, other type of revolts, basically all of them belong to the non-Muslim category. When they were revolting, it was at that period of time when in the region where such revolts were taking place, to suppress them, not only military was assigned the duty to squash them, but also the main temples of those people was also broken down. In Varanasi, for example, you know that in Banaras also there is a contention that a particular temple was broken and converted into a mosque. The charge which was brought out was that it belonged to, and it was being maintained by the family of Raja Jaswant Singh of Amer, right? Jaswant Singh's son was Ram Singh. Who was Jaswant Singh? Just for your audience.
I'm going to interject you for 1 second. I just want to know, what was the reason for the revolts? Why were these communities revolting against Aurangzeb?
If you read the works of people like Satish Chandra, Irfan Habib, it was the economic reasons. Because of the excessive taxation, Mughal state, being a pre-modern state, was a regressive state in which heavy taxation, regressive taxation, was being imposed on the masses. And as a result of that, during this period of Aurangzeb, a large number of revolts occurred. They never occurred before that.
Why only from non-Muslims? Why weren't the Muslims revolting?
No, they were of Yusufzai revolt, for example, in the northwest frontier. There were a large number of Muslims who were revolting. It's not only, the thing is that even today, if you look at the population of North India, the Indo-Gangetic plain, who are in a majority. It's the non-Muslims who are in the majority. Who were in the majority 80% of the or 85% of the people who were inhabiting this area during the 17th century. Once again, it was the non-Muslims. They were there. So if even in case of a popular revolt, in any popular revolt, the majority of the people who were involved belong to that religion which was popular, and that is why they were mostly Hindus. It was not that it was a Hindu rebellion. All those who were living there, who were peasants, they might be Hindus, they might be Muslims, but then, as you say, that where 80% belong to one particular religion, you somehow miss the people of the other community. So it was. Let us not look at it in the light of religion. Look at it as Satish Chandra has done, as Irfan Habib has done, as Ahmad Ali has done, as a large number of other historians have done. They show that during Aurangzeb's period, due to a number of reasons, we don't have time here to discuss all the reasons what led to the decline, but it was the period when all sorts of problems were starting in the society, and especially the peasants and those who belong to the common masses, they were out on revolt. For example, the work of Iqtidar Alam Khan, Professor Iqtidar Alam Khan, shows that by this time, by the end of Shah Jahan's reign, gunpowder was freely available to the masses. By Aurangzeb's period, we find reference that even the farmers tilling their land had guns and gunpowder in their fields. So if the gun and gunpowder are there in the hands of the masses, now they can face the Mughal army. Before, when you had to fight with bow and arrow against the Mughal army, which was the only army which would be having the cannons and the handheld guns, it was difficult to fight. But now both the armies, the state army as well as the general masses, both have guns in their hands, howsoever inferior. But now at least they can kill one or two soldiers, and that is why when Satnami revolt broke out, we find that in the initial stages, the Mughal army was stunned because a large number of Mughal soldiers were killed by the gunfire of these peasant communities. So same thing happened during the revolt. Only when ultimately the Mughal army reorganized itself, they came with their own sophisticated guns and armaments, that they were able to defeat the peasant communities. So the thing is that there were a number of reasons. The basic revolt is that when you keep taking regressive taxation, when you don't leave any food grain for them to survive, they would tend to revolt. Secondly, if they have the means how to revolt, they would use it to revolt. These conditions were not there in the period earlier to Aurangzeb, and that is why popular revolts are not heard of during that period, and they are heard of only during the period of from the period of Aurangzeb. So what I am trying to say is that it was during the period of revolts when certain actions were taken. I will give you one example for you to understand. I keep on giving this example in all the interviews which I give, and that is the issue which Aurangzeb had with the Rathors of Jodhpur. In 1680, the ruler of Jodhpur died, not leaving any son to succeed. The tradition of that period was that the succession would be decided by the king. The tika among the Rajputs, tika was the ceremony that it would be the emperor who would put the tika on the forehead of the successor and tie the turban. And he would be, remember Rani of Jhansi, what was she fighting for against the Britishers? That was her demand too, that her child, whom she was suckling, should be declared as the ruler of Jhansi. The British declined because they said that among the Rajputs, there is no tradition of an infant succeeding to the gaddi of the father. Similarly, it happened during the period of Rathors. Rani Hadi, the chief queen of Raja Jaswant Singh, who had died, wrote a letter, and that letter survives in the Vakai. Vakai means newsletters, which were sent from Ajmer to the court, and letters which were sent from the court to the Rajput courts. So there is a whole pothi, which is known as Vakai Ajmer, recording the correspondence between these two, courts. And in this, there is a letter. It's not in Persian. It is the Rajasthani rendering of the Persian letter sent to Aurangzeb. So it is in the possession of the Rajputs themselves. We are not talking about a letter coming from the library of the Mughal themselves. It is a letter which is with the Rajputs. And in this, Rani Hadi is requesting Aurangzeb that please recognize me as the ruler, or anyone whom I am supporting, nominate that person, and in return, I am ready to break any number of temples you want. I will break them myself. Now, this letter proves two things. One, that she knew that perhaps Aurangzeb would be ready to break the temples. So, one thing is established, that Aurangzeb did have this tendency that at any pretense of any problem, he was ready to break the temples. Right? And second, that Rani Hadi herself, she is in modern terms a Hindu, a believer of those gods whose temples they are, but she is saying, no issues, I'll break them myself. Just recognize me as the political head. Aurangzeb refused. Aurangzeb did not break the temples. He forbade it. He said, no, I'm not going to recognize. Right? But 1 year later, when the Rathors rebelled, we are not discussing the Rathor rebellion, that I go into the details why they rebelled. Suffice to say, when the queen offered to break the temples, Aurangzeb refused. But the same Aurangzeb broke the temples 1 year later. When the Rathor Rajputs revolted against the Mughals. When the Mughal army was sent to quell the revolt, it was at that time that a number of temples in the Rathor state were broken by the forces of Aurangzeb.
Were they replaced by mosques or places of
No,
Muslim significance?
no,
No.
no. They were just broken down, proving what Richard Eaton had written earlier, that in case of rebellion, the mosque would be broken. Same thing had happened in Mathura. Same thing had happened in Jalore. Same thing had happened in a large number of other places. Wherever there was a strife, wherever Aurangzeb thought that he was going to face a challenge, he would break. In fact, remember that Aurangzeb also punished the Muslim community also. It is not that only temples were being broken. In case of rebellion, even the places of worship related with those rebels who were Muslims, they were also demolished in the same fashion. The problem is that today we don't talk about it. In a large number of temples throughout North India, we still have inscriptions where the Brahmins of those temples are thanking Aurangzeb that he gave maintenance grant. Now, gradually and slowly, those epigraphs are being made to disappear. No one is talking about them. In fact, one of the inscriptions which I had seen with my own eyes, when I returned to see it, there is a blank in the wall because that has been removed. So only one version is trying to be shown. Unfortunately, sir, what is happening today, may I say that from 2014 itself, is that an attempt is being made at the official level to divide the Indians based on what religion they follow. Number two, a very serious attempt is being made to replace history with mythology. I would go a little further and say that the English term mythology is too diluted a term to be used for what is happening today. Mythology means something which might have happened, but for which we do not have enough proof to show that it really happened. Remember that Herodotus is supposed to be the father of history. And what did he write? He wrote the mythology of the Greeks, the stories of the heroes of Greece, the gods of Greece. That is mythology. They might have existed, but they have been shown as greater than men. That is mythology. There is one point that perhaps that particular person being referred to as God might not have been there as a god, but might have existed as a king. For example, Shiva, the Purandar, Shiva, the god, Hindu god. Now it has been established that he was given the title of Purandar, the destroyer of forts. He was a king of the Aryan clan which had invaded India. He was the king of that clan, who was, making incursions, destroying the forts of the indigenous people, replacing them with the towns of the Aryans. Later on, he was, elevated to the position of God. That is mythology. But what is happening now is that instead of resorting to mythology, you are writing myth, a Sanskrit term. Myth means imaginary, something which never happened. Something, not that it might have happened, we don't have proof, something which comes straight from our own thinking, our wishful thinking. So, what is happening now in India is that the textbooks which were there, which had been written by professional historians, people who were well established historians whose scholarship was known throughout the world, people like Domila Thapar, people like R.S. Sharma, people like, Satish Chandra, people like Bipan Chandra. They were top class historians who had written textbooks for the school children. And what had they written? All those researches which had been done by the historians community, professional historians community, that was written in a lighter language which these young children could understand. That is why they were called textbooks. So, broad theories which require in volumes to be explained, they were reduced to a paragraph and explained by these people. They were the things which were being taught. But they were such textbooks were first during the first regime of the BJP led by Atal Bihari Vajpayee. They were replaced by textbooks where those hardcore facts were set aside, replaced by the mythologies, lighter versions of history, or versions which were not that important for these from the point of view of understanding the past.
So what you're saying
Where
is that this did not start from Modi or from 2014.
what I'm saying is that it is gradually that they have done.
Right.
In the first step was taken around 2013. No, when was it when Atal Bihari was there?
Sometime in the 1990s.
It was around 1990s or something. I'm forgetting the date. Perhaps it was the new textbooks were launched in 2003 or something like that, where they replaced all those stalwarts and fresh historians were taken. No myth was added. The only first step was that hardcore facts were removed and certain other things were added. And later on, when from 2015-16, once again, when attempts were being made by people like Batra, who are RSS trained, pseudo scholars, they started coming out with their textbooks. They started replacing even those lighter histories with what is known as myth. Now, for example, there is a challenge. Akbar was great or Rana Pratap was great. You know, the poor man himself, exceeded defeat. He had no issues. He was not fighting for religion at all. He was fighting for his own territory. But now, something which had no base, which no feeble account of history had even mentioned. Suddenly, what we find is that Akbar had been defeated a number of times and Rana Pratap is the actual winner. What is this? It is just our wishful thinking. What is happening now is that we are tailoring our past as per our own, thinking.
And,
I'm
I'll get back to that in 1 second. Let me ask you one question. I mean, the country was led by Muslim rulers for a very long time. And so Muslims were in minority, Hindus were in majority, but they still were ruling the country. It's not hard to imagine that they would impose, for example, naming of places, they would impose their names onto places that were of Hindu significance. Was there a practice of sort of like naming places after your children
not
or after
really. Not really. For example, they came out with this Allahabad, for example. They circulated a theory that it is Allah, the Muslim god. Allahabad, Prayag was the Hindu town which was now named as Allahabad. Fact of the matter is that it is the colonial masters, the Britishers, the English, who started calling this place as Allahabad. Right? Akbar had renamed it, but he had not renamed this place, Prayag, as Allahabad. Akbar himself was no believer of God. He doubted whether there is a God or not.
Mm-hmm.
He had named it after a Devi, Ila, who was a local Hindu goddess. And the name which was given, go and read the original Persian texts. Persian text of, say, for example, Akbarnama, Ain Akbari, the account of Muntakhabut Tawarikh written by Mullah Abdul Qadir Badaini. Read the account of Arif Kandhari, Tarikh-e-Akbari or Tarikh-e-Kandhari. Read any of those sources. The name which was given to this city was Ilah Bas, the place of goddess Ila. Right? So it was a Hindu name which was given. The city where I am sitting at the moment is known as Aligarh. The old name of the city was Kol or Koel. Kol was the name of a demoness, a demon, a she-demon, who had been defeated by one of the relatives of Lord Krishna. And because this demoness had been killed by Krishna's brother, if I am not wrong, at this particular place. So this place started being called as Koe or Kor, the place where this demoness had died. Right? Now this name was used by Akbar, this name was used by Aurangzeb, this name continued up till the Maratha times. The moment when Marathas were the kingmakers, Mahadji Sindhya, when they were holding the fort of Aligarh, the Mughal fort at Aligarh, when that was under their occupation, the commander of the fort was a Mughal noble. You know, remember that even the Mughal emperor was the servant of the Marathas, Mahadji. Mahadji would order and the Mughal emperor would follow. That was the time when it is said that the Mughal crown was a shuttlecock. He had no powers in his hand. From Delhi, Tapalam was the period. Then from the Lal Qila till the Palam village, that was the only place where he had authority. The other places were being ruled only by name. Mahadji was the person, the commander. It was under him, it was the Maratha rule. So when this person, who was a Muslim, Najaf Ali, he was holding this fort on behalf, not of the Mughals, on behalf of the Marathas. His name was Najaf Ali, and Mahadji and company started calling this as Aligarh. Garh means fort, the fort of Najaf Ali, Aligarh. After some time, this fort was conquered by the armies of the East India Company, the Britishers, the English. Right? And when this entire place came under the occupation of the Britishers during the 19th century, the name of this fortress, Aligarh, was now given to the entire cantonment area, the modern civil lines of Aligarh. And then there was some difficulty, fiscal difficulty, that the main town was known as Kol and this area was known as Aligarh. So in order to, bring some uniformity, the entire city and ultimately the entire town, the district, came to be known as Aligarh. What I am trying to say is that the name Aligarh was given after the Mughals, by the Marathas, ultimately by the Britishers. The Muslims had nothing to do with that. Even today, I don't know whether you have traveled in North India or not. When you pass through North India, you will find Farrukhabad, you will find Jaswant Nagar, the names given by the governors to the places that they were holding.
Let me ask you this, Prof.
So all these name changes which were there were not based on their religion. The names were there on the names of those powerful people, Hindu or Muslim, who were holding them.
So we were just talking about why the government or people within the Indian government are doing this. Is there, like, I have known Hinduism to be a very secular religion, a very liberal religion, according to my study, my opinion. Why are they doing this? Why are they sort of like making Muslims invisible?
Have you read Veer Savarkar?
I've not.
If you read his books, you will realize that, when we say that Hinduism is benign, is all embracing, it's not at all wrong. Hinduism still is such. The only point is that today, even the Hindus are suffering. What is being done in their name is being done by what should be called, identified as Hindutva. Hindutva and Hinduism are two different things. The Hindutva philosophy is the philosophy which is predominant today, which is during the national movement was represented by people like Veer Savarkar, people like Hindu Mahasabha, those who in the 1930s itself or 1927 itself had given the call for a separate nation for the Hindus and a separate nation for the Muslims. In fact, this entire business of dividing the country on the basis of religion was not given by any Hindu power, it was given by the Hindutva forces which are now in power in India. So there is a major difference between Hinduism as a religion and the Hindutva modern entity which is there in power. It is the same as one says that Hitler was a Christian. Yes, he was a Christian, but of the Nazi variety. He believed in a philosophy which today we identify as Nazism. The philosophy which is ruling over us might basically be derived from Hinduism, there is no doubt, because basically 80%, 90% of the followers of Hindutva come from the Hindu religion. Although we know there are people like Mukhtar Abbas, Shah Nawaz Khan, there are a large number of Muslim blood is also, which is now in the Hindutva forces. But basically, Najma Heptullah, the daughter of the great Maulana Abul Kalam Azad, they are all, followers of Arif Muhammad Khan. They are not coming out from the Hindu stock. They are all coming from the so-called Muslim stock, but they, are following the policy of Savarkar and Hindu Mahasabha, and that is what Savarkar calls as Hindutva. In fact, in his book, What is Hinduism? Savarkar defines that Hindutva is very different from Hinduism, and he fights for Hindutva, and that is what is happening today. If out of ignorance some Muslim or someone blames Hinduism for that, then I think it is totally wrong, and that person should be condemned. It is not Hinduism, but for the Hindus, India is still surviving as a nation. Majority of those who follow the old path of Hinduism, it is because of them that people like me or anybody are still able to live in this country.
So how is that? How is that? Like, I mean, this government is quite clearly, a very sort of radical, believes in very radical Hindu ideology, Hindu nationalism, according to the reports. How is it if what you were saying is right and most people do not agree with the Hindutva ideology? How is it that this government has been able to win presidential elections for 3 times?
The human psyche. You always create the other and try to build up a fear psychosis. That is what happened in Mussolini's Italy. This is what happened in Germany under the Nazis. This is nothing new which is happening. What they are doing is that they are still, thankfully, in a minority now. In this third term, they are still more in a minority, but you will find that they are still as much aggressive as they were before, and that is because they have, they can't give you jobs, they can't feed you. Majority of the masses are hungry, and they are illiterate. There's hardly any education among them. So you go to them, say anything, and the poor illiterate masses might fall victim to that. And that is what has been happening. They have been doling out, poison, which is being consumed by the masses, and they are being misled. In fact, show me a riot where it is not the Dalit, whether it is a Hindu-Muslim riot or a riot between the Hindus and the Sikhs, or a riot between anybody. I mean, in 1984, it was a Hindu versus Sikhs riots. But who were those who were killed apart from the Sikhs? It was the Dalits. It was they who were killed. In my city, when riots used to take place, I mean, go and look at all the reports which have been published on the riots themselves. Is there any Hindu belonging to the higher echelons of the social order? Were any of them killed or became victims? No. It was the Pastbanda, the downtrodden who are used as the fodder. Even today, the same thing is happening. It is, the wish for getting some job or the food, that they are being misled. The type of, propaganda which is being done is that you would have got a job, but for this people, mass of people, remove them and you will get the job. Where is your money? It is these people who are, sitting over your money. So remove them and you get, and these poor masses who are illiterate, they are falling victim to that. It is not the victory of any Hindu religion at all, or defeat of Muslims as such. It is only the hunger for power of a particular political section, which unfortunately most of them comes from the Hindu society, who are criminals basically. They are holding power today, and they, in the name of the sacred Hindu gods, they are trying to run the show. And that has
So,
happened in the past. For example, there were a large number of Muslim Khalifas who had no basic knowledge of Islam, who were drunkards, who did everything which had been forbidden by Islam. Still, they were known as Khalifas, and they were ruling as if they are the representatives of God on earth. This has been happening on this earth from since very beginning. So that is nothing to be surprised about. It is
I mean,
not Hindu versus.
some people, I completely agree with you. I have to say, I don't like to share my opinions, but in this case, I will completely agree with you that it's not Hindu religion, it's radicals. What you are saying, it's politics, essentially. They're being good politicians.
I'll add one thing. Who was Babar? He was a Central Asian, there is no doubt. Right? He came from Central Asia. He had no Indian blood in him. Humayun, he had no, Indian blood in him. What about Akbar? Akbar was born in a Hindu family, in a Rajput family. Amarkot. Amarkot people were Rajputs. The wet nurse was a Turkish woman. Baram Khan, who trained him, was a Shia. Right? Who was Jahangir? Father, a Mughal, no doubt. A person like Akbar. A mother, an Indian woman. We don't even know her name. So she doesn't belong to a very high caste also. A woman who is of Indian origin, a Hindu, but not of a Rajput origin. Who is Shah Jahan? The son of a Mughal father and a Rajput mother. The father is also half Rajput or half Hindu. Shah Jahan is 2/3 Hindu. Who is Aurangzeb? 1/3 Mughal, 2/3 an indigenous person. So if you start looking at, if you look at the, Akbarnama paintings, what does Akbar wear? Dhoti. What type of language does he speak? Within his family, not Turkish, not Persian, Hindustani. The Awadhi, Punjabi, all these languages started developing. He was a master of Hindavi. For example, today we are talking in English. But suddenly, if I get angry and I have to use cuss words, what language would I use?
Your local
I would
language.
use my mother tongue. So Akbar, when he uses cuss words, they are Hindavi words. On your show, I won't speak those, what we call as the foul mouth language of Akbar. That is also how he writes. So what is happening is that these Mughals, whom you are calling foreigner, they're not foreigner, because there is no nation. There is no nation known as India. It's a territory. Whoever lives in this territory of Hind is a Hindustani. And that is why when, he's fighting Shivaji, Shivaji is not fighting against Aurangzeb, that because Aurangzeb is a Muslim. Bijapur and Golconda, who are closer home to Shivaji, they are also Muslims. But Aurangzeb has first to defeat Bijapur and Golconda, because both these Muslim states are aligned with Shivaji. Shivaji, the court of Shivaji, is organized on the fashion of the Mughal court and the courts of these two Muslim dynasties which are near at home, Bijapur and Golconda. Who is the general of Mughal army who defeats Shivaji? He is Mirza Raja Jai Singh, the father of Ram Singh. Who is the commander of Shivaji's army? He is a Khan. So we are talking of a time when all these players, they are no friend of each other. But their fight is not on the basis of religion. They are least concerned with the religion. They are fighting for their own power. They are fighting for their own territory. To Shivaji, there is a person who is coming from another region in order to capture his region. And that is why he is opposing.
Let me ask you this. So, where do you see the situation going as it relates to Muslims? Some people say that anytime history is changed against a community, that leads to genocide against that community. Do you agree with that assumption?
Whatever is happening in the country, perhaps any sensitive person would be led to have this conclusion that we are hurtling towards a genocide. Examples are before us.
So I want to make sure you're not talking about ethnic cleansing. You are talking about genocide, the killing of a community.
I am not talking about ethnic cleansing. I am talking about genocide. What happened in Gujarat in 2002 is actually a window to what might happen once again. The way certain of the North Indian states are functioning, we have a constitution, we have rules and regulations. In the Indian constitution, if someone is guilty, the charges of guilt are to be developed, they are to be investigated. There's a special agency. I mean, if I do something wrong to you, you would make a complaint, but the investigations would not be made by you, not by you, but by the state, by the police. And after the investigations have been made, all this would go to the court. And then both me as an accused and you as the accuser would have to right to defend our positions. And ultimately, in view of the law and the constitution, the acts of parliament, as well as what has been guaranteed in the constitution, the decision would be given by the judge. Only when a certain decision has been given, it would not be immediately imposed. Once again, as an accused who has been convicted by a lesser court, I would be given some time to go and appeal to the higher court. And this would pass through a number of processes. And still, if I am found guilty, then, and if I still want to avoid it, I would appeal to the president of the country. And it is only at that level that it would be decided whether I should be given that punishment or not. In case of if it is not charge of murder, in case if it is not the fact that I have been sentenced to be put to death, in case if it is just that I am to be held as a prisoner for life, the matter would still go up to the Supreme Court. And petition and then review petitions would be filed. It is only after all those things that the sentence would be carried out. Right? But what is happening in the country? What is happening in the country that it is the state which suddenly would accuse you of something. They would come up with charges which would never be brought to the court. They would never be investigated, because on day one, accusations would be made. On day two, there would be a bulldozer which would demolish your property. I'm not talking out of hat. Just a few days back, there one crime, I would say crime, because I don't know. The newspapers say that that person committed a crime. So he was a criminal. What did the state do? They went and demolished the house. And when it was being demolished, there was one other person standing there who said, "Why are you demolishing my house? He is the criminal and he is my tenant. This is my property." Still, they went ahead and demolished that house. What is happening in this country since a large number of years is that if you belong to a particular community, without any trial, without any reason, even for a minor fault, even if you have met with an accident on the road, there would be a bulldozer which will demolish your property. I'm not saying, I mean, even in fact, I believe that even in the case of the, a very serious, activity on my part, Constitution says that I should be given the right to defend myself. And it is only after due process of law that I should be punished. But what is happening in India today is instant mass justice. Unfortunately, I am saying this, but so many judges sitting in the local courts, so many judges, all well-read people sitting in the high courts, some of them posing to be very secular. We have the Supreme Court. I'm putting my neck out and saying that all those judges, have any one of them pointed out that where is the law through which you are doing all that? We saw a couple of years back when riots took place in Delhi. It was the people of one community who suffered. It was they who were sent to the prison. It is their young men who are still in jail. Every other day, whenever there is an issue with BJP government, any political crisis which is occurring for them, and they have no answer for it, one fine morning, the newspapers will not be carrying the news of their fault. They would be carrying the, an Atankwadi, anti-national, has been caught and he is being persecuted and he is thrown in jail. It is only after, a number of years, sometimes 10 years, that he is proved that nothing, he had done nothing. He was innocent. But by that time, his entire family, his entire, family, I should say, they have lost everything. That is what is happening. And I'm sorry to say that in most of the, I'm not saying that it is only and only the Muslims who are facing this criminal activity, but a majority of those who pass through what I am telling you, they belong to this particular community, which we call as Muslims.
Are Muslims
That is why I
organizing?
believe that yes, there is something which we should worry about, but then the historian in me, as a historian, as a rational person, as a person who has studied the past, I will say that many days, much worse than these, have come to our subcontinent, visited our society, but have vanished within a few years. I think these days would also pass, and we would be back to the normal position. So I don't think that anyone is going to disappear. Yes, there would be problem for some time, but there is always hope. I do believe
You
that
don't fear genocide then? You're not fearing genocide? Or do you
uh,
think there is a
well,
likelihood that it will happen?
Nazi Germany genocide did take place, but ultimately, once again, after a few years, things became normal. So genocide might take place. I'm not denying it. All the symptoms are there. What I am saying is that it would not be the end of the day. By no stretch of imagination can an entire community make a disappearance from this country. They are there to live. By the way, you are talking to a person whose father who was, living at the time when partition took place, he had an option to go to Pakistan. In fact, at the time when India became independent in 1947, My father was outside this country. He was in Iraq, in Karbala. And after the partition, there were many who were, in fact, he was a friend of one of those who was financing Pakistan. So there were offers which were made, come over to Pakistan. He refused. He came back to India, even at a time when he had lost his job, he had lost all his property. He opted for this country. There are very few people, and all those very few people, they belong to the Muslim community who had an option to go elsewhere. They chose India. We are Indian Muslims. We chose India. The so-called Hindutva, who are now asking Pakistan jao, they had no place to go. They had no option. They are here not because they love the country. They never fought under the tricolor. They always made fun of the tricolor. They never took part in the freedom movement. They were the mukbirs, spies of the colonial masters. And today they pose that they are the nationalists, and we who fought for the freedom, we are being shown as we are the enemies of the state. This will happen for some time, but not forever.
Professor, I'm going to ask you this one question, which really troubles me because I'm someone who works in the media industry. I've been working ever since I graduated. Um, why is the media so docile to the Modi government? Like, it's extremely docile. And it's, for me, I look up to India. India is this great country. I meet Indian people, great culture. I would never expect the Indian media to behave like this, especially in this
So
age.
we are living in a time of capitalism where there are certain business houses which own everything. Uh, there was a time in my younger days when I would be buying a number of newspapers, the Hindu, the Times of India, Indian Express, the local papers, to see what have this paper reported, how has this paper done, because each of them had their own personal viewpoint. Today, the situation is that all of them are either of Ambani or of Adani. They belong to one business family. I know because in my family there are at least 4 or 5 journalists. Some in Hindi newspapers, mostly in English newspapers, in national newspapers like Times of India, Hindustan. I can tell you that all these, journalists, even senior journalists, they are working under threat. Uh, the threat to them is that they would be thrown out of job. Look at Ravish Kumar. One fine morning, he was on the road. That's another matter that somehow the social media, he was lucky enough, but not everyone is lucky. If you visit YouTube, there are many former journalists of this newspaper and that media house who are now sitting on YouTube with their own channels, shouting and with their, throats hoarse. But who is listening to them? You lose your livelihood. You lose the admissions to universities and colleges. All sort of problems. One fine morning, if I say something, you know, one, a letter from the higher authorities would come to me. Explain this. Everyone fears for the livelihood. In India, we are living at a time when there is a paucity of jobs.
I want people to know in India and in Pakistan, I want people to know in these two countries that yes, India has this problem with the media. But thinking about it, because I've been working in the Western media ever since I graduated, so like for about 15 years now. And I mean, there's a lot of people in America that would tell you literally the same thing about American media, how corporations have bought journalists, how journalists do not say what they want to say, fearing that they would lose their jobs. So it's not just something that is happening in India or
Yes,
Pakistan.
yes,
Happening in
very
America.
true. I said that we are living in capitalist times, so wherever there is capitalism, these things happen. But you asked why most of the journalists are silent. My particular reading is, after meeting my cousins and others, that they don't speak because they fear for their jobs, they fear for their families, and I know certain journalists who have made sacrifices because they did not stop speaking. So that is one of the things why this is happening. And I can tell you that there are very few people who would have talked to you in the fashion in which I have been discussing things with you. In India today, if you go to any person,
Very much.
they
I
they,
appreciate that.
they refuse to talk. Uh,
Let me
so
ask you my last question. And my last question would be like studying sort of the radical element within the Indian government. I have come to the conclusion that they don't have any morals, meaning that they would do anything to accomplish what they want. So can we really trust the Indian electoral system any longer? Like, is it still free and fair, or is there a lot of government intervention making sure that certain
it has been compromised.
Professor, if I may ask one more, so I'm going to ask you two questions. So one is that. My second question was, what's stopping, like, closer to the next elections, what's stopping radical elements within the government to create a false flag operation against Pakistan, create war so that they can get even more votes if they lose their sort of like the number of seats that they want in the next elections?
Well, to answer your second question, I fear that that might happen because this is what they have done in the past as well. The second term which they won, this present government won, was through this power play with against Pakistan. This is how they won their sympathies, and this might happen once again. But as far as our electoral system is concerned, I still have hopes. Yes, it is. It has been severely compromised. Uh, you know, uh, I know that there are a number of seats which actually the BJP had lost, but somehow through recountings and recountings, they actually managed it with their own officers and administrators at the helm of the affair, declaring their candidate as the winner. So that has happened even in the last election, and still, in spite of doing all that, there was a reduction in their seat. I still believe that if the Indian masses, some of them have awakened up, most of them because of their illiteracy, because of the fear which is there in their mind that they might lose something if they don't vote, this particular dispensation, they still keep on voting. Secondly, we have yet to learn that we have to unite against these people. Still, what has happened is that in spite of a common front being formed, there were many who thought that they don't have any choice but to try once more time to give a chance to Narendra Modi. Uh, Howsoever, they have lost many seats. They are fearful. If the democratic process is used once again, there is a strong chance that they would lose. But as you say, that if other means are used, well, then don't blame the democracy for that.